Well, the New York Jewish Life is a new weekly news magazine covering the issues of importance to the city's diverse Jewish communities and beyond. Joining us now is Michael Tobman. Now, he was a former aide to Senator Chuck Schumer, but now he's the publisher of New York Jewish Life. Welcome to BK Live, sir.
Happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Happy to have you. A first time at the table,
yes,
and a first time publisher of this magnitude. What drew you from the world of politicking to publishing now?
Well, I had too much free time and I was making too much money as a consultant, so now I have neither of both. No, in all seriousness, you know, it could be safely said that anyone who worked in Senator Schumer's orbit was involved in communications and press work. So having a taste of that then, and I was chief of staff of the Nassau County Legislature before that, and after law school I clerked. Media and presenting your accomplishments and driving and shaping the narrative and conversation is always a part of politics, government, arts, culture, and it's what you do here at BRIC.
So we, I guess, from the beginning of the show to now, we're highlighting these people who are taking second acts, and this is a second act of sorts for you. So I wonder why step into the world of dying newspapers and fake news and getting on that media track?
I don't know that it's dying. I think that niche publications that have a clear sense of their identity, thoughtfully crafted and curated, do well. If you talk to advertisers, when it comes to community news, 80–90% of their advertising budgets and revenue are still in print. We're online, and advertising online can be a bit amorphous, but you know the old joke. I know that half the people are seeing my ads, I just don't know which half. Right. Depending on the issue, we were between 15,000 and 20,000 weekly print distribution, curated drop distribution throughout the 5 boroughs, Nassau County, Westchester, and in Albany. So no, we're very optimistic about the health of print, and we're happy to be part of it.
Well, if print is going to be saved, it's definitely going to be by these niche publications that are really speaking to people. So I wondered who you are speaking to. Who do you think your reader is, and what's your purview when you present your publication? Right.
Well, that clip from that movie from the, I guess, the early 1930s,
yeah.
You know, I was looking for my grandparents in that picture. My paternal grandfather lived in the Lower East Side before he went to volunteer in the Spanish Civil War in the Abraham Lincoln Brigade, and then came back and moved to Brooklyn. I'm Brooklyn born and raised and still live here 5 blocks away. But that's a snapshot in time, and New York's diverse Jewish communities are now Russian-speaking and Sephardic and Hasidic and secular and conservative and conservadox and reconstructionist, and it's diverse, whether it's Bukharian in Queens or full-on Russian-speaking in Brighton Beach or Sheepshead Bay. Upper West Side, New Rochelle, White Plains, the 5 towns in Nassau County, but also a broader audience, you know, much in the way the New York Sun years ago and other papers, and the New York Times still, and what we see with community papers throughout the city, they have an identity, and then they talk about other things. So we could talk about water board rates in Queens, or we could talk about de Blasio and Cuomo. We could talk about film reviews.
So I'm wondering what an edit meeting is like at New York Jewish Life, because as you pointed out, this community isn't a monolith.
Correct.
You've got the Russian, or you have all of those groups that you talk about. So does everyone come in with stuff and jockey for position? What's it like? Because I've scrolled through and I've seen you're touching on issues in Israel, you're touching on Russian Jews here, like there's so much varied coverage.
Some of it is driven by current events. So for example, our piece, Russian Views on Russian News, discussing these things with the Russian-speaking community, current events in Rego Park, in Kew Gardens, in Sheepshead Bay, and Brighton Beach. That's driven obviously by current events. But other things, people reach out to us. You know, we presented ourselves as being out there. Folks know us from politics. They know us from community affairs. They reach out, and oftentimes, you know, we sit around, usually over a pint somewhere near here, actually, and talk about what we want the next couple weeks to look like, and then we go about filling that in. As I said, current events, and then other times freelancers and our staff bring things to us that they care about. And then we spend time on that.
Cool. One current event that we're all talking about outside of Russia, of course, there was a great poll that you guys have commissioned, the New York Jewish Life poll. New York Jews, would you vote for Trump over Clinton again, especially here in Brooklyn? Now, that is a great jumping off point. And the question, before we reveal the results, I want to ask if you were at all surprised by them.
I was. The poll, to be fair, was conducted a couple weeks before our launch date. I pressed and made everybody crazy that we launched on my 44th birthday on March 7th. We're 6 months in. I always expected that in Park Slope, Brooklyn Heights, and you could sort of parse the polls a lot of different ways. Upper West Side, Upper East Side, solidly for Clinton, yes. But among the Orthodox communities in the 5 towns, in Queens, in Midwood, in Marine Park, where there's a heavy young Orthodox community, their distaste for the Obama administration's relations with Israel really did still inform their views of the Democratic Party. And let's not forget, Hillary Clinton was Secretary of State and was present for a lot of this. So was I surprised? I was surprised by the numbers. In some cases, they were substantial. But noteworthy, issues around culture wars, for example, marriage equality and reproductive rights, community fairly split. And to say that a community that is organized around faith is split kind of close, 52-48, we're not talking 70-30, I think says basically anybody a certain age, below a certain age, you know, these issues just don't drive them.
You know what, let's mine that a little bit more, because you also had this great article about how Jewish communities and some legislatures are getting behind this idea about climate change that is directly in the face of everything that the Trump administration has shown us. So it's like, you can support the guy or the idea that he's presenting, but still have a solid, separate interest and point of view on real substantive issues that affect everyone.
Contrary to the sort of larger zeitgeist and narrative out there, I believe that voters, people, are very sophisticated thinkers. It might not appear that way sometimes, but I think people are endlessly fascinated.
Even single-issue voters.
But yes. On issues, let's say, again, of reproductive rights and women's health. But people compartmentalize their thinking. And you can think that the Obama administration was unfair to Israel and be happy to support somebody opposite those international affair priorities, but still embrace the science of climate change. These things can sort of coexist in people. Now, the thing about elections is they're about choices. You don't get to choose, you know,
not a
yes, except when. But these issues, we hope, and we just saw it with what's going on with the ACA. Republicans understand that in their home state, people are making use of Medicaid expansion, and they need mental health coverage and addiction services, addiction treatment services. So despite what they've been saying throughout the Obama years, when the rubber meets the road, you know, they chose to err on the side of first do no harm instead of repeal and replace.
So speaking of the ACA, we know that they've now yanked the thing, and the president is tweeting, just repeal the whole thing. But I wondered how much of your time spent on the Hill there you tap into. Are you like calling your friends back there to get some stuff?
For sure. I don't know terribly much more than what we read in the papers, because of modern media, between tweets and Facebook.
It's all there.
And here it's all there. But no, I'm a big fan of the ACA. Insurance is about spreading risk. It's not just a payment mechanism. It's supposed to be expensive, and unless you're going to have single payer. And you need young people and healthy people in the system in order to spread the risk.
So I sort of glazed over the numbers before, so I want to go back to the would you vote for Trump over Clinton again? And there was still some significant margins. So 62% in Brooklyn said yeah, and 24% in Queens. And you also have a footnote. Meanwhile, in Manhattan, Clinton held a 53% edge over Trump in heavily Jewish zip codes that you guys polled.
And also in the 5 towns in Nassau County, and then Woodbury, Jericho, Port Washington, Syosset, still heavily for Trump. But we see that sometimes the largest indicator of how someone's going to vote is party ID. Republicans vote for Republicans. It's why 53% of white women voted for Trump. But in this case, these are Democratic areas. They vote Democratic in local elections sometimes, certainly in New York City, if not in Nassau County, and yet still, I really think this is a consequence of their wanting a different direction in terms of attitudes towards Israel.
So what do you think of this notion of tribalism when it comes to the elections as well now? Do you think, knowing how diverse the community is that you speak to on a daily basis, who is speaking to Jewish voters that you think the message is disseminating the best and not treating people as, if you want to win the Jews, you got to talk about Israel, and that's it.
It's much more nuanced, as you said, and complicated and diverse than that. Certainly, it's an issue of enormous importance, but we see recent policy. We write about it in this week's issue, which is being produced and put to bed as we speak. Cool. Recent policy and political and religious decisions in Israel are sort of shutting out Reform and conservative Jews here in the United States in favor of purely Orthodox and ultra-Orthodox Hasidic. Right. That's not right, and my column this week is opposite that. So communities that used to have more of an innate, immediate connection to Israel now need more discussion. And Israel's sort of official policy has been, we're not interested in having that conversation with American Jews that have questions. So that's a problem. So what that means is you talk about things like health care, like reproductive rights, like gender equity, and you mentioned David Greenfield going over to the Met Council on Jewish poverty, issues of social services. Especially in the Hasidic community, a community that doubles its population every 10 years. There are real needs there, poverty. Right? Yeah. Infrastructure, transportation, the F train. You know, you speak to them about everything. In the 5 towns, it talks about the tuition crisis. Families are paying property taxes for schools that they don't use. So aid to tuition paying families. So it gets wrapped up in everything.
Yeah, so we have been fortunate enough to actually have community members sit at the table, and we've talked about things about yeshivas, and we've also talked about representation in the community. So I just wanted to ask you about that broader voice in some of the sectors of the community that are a little more closed, and just giving voice to them as well, and what that dialogue is like for you.
It's at times challenging. I've worked very closely with the Satmar Hasidic community in Williamsburg, right near here. Yeah. What's so interesting about that community is there are 3 guiding principles. One is geographic proximity. They're right here. We ride the trains together. We go down Flushing Avenue. We have bike lanes. It's always an issue. But despite the geographic proximity, there is absolute cultural separation. Right. So people shouldn't mistake that proximity for engagement. Exactly. And then the third thing is total participation in our civic life. So though the separation, vote in a block. Yeah. But again, issues around yeshiva education, social services, sometimes it's just about being left alone. Yeah. Development, so you have 7 or 8 children, a 3-bedroom apartment is not the luxury that we know it is. Yeah. For smaller families, it's a necessity. Yeah. So discussing things like that.
It's fascinating. Healthcare. I love when we can get a glimpse into a group that has so much political power, but is often like on the receiving end of social services,
and misunderstood.
And misunderstood completely. So, in our last 2 minutes, give us a preview of what you are working on. You sort of hinted at something that's going to be in the upcoming edition.
My column this week is editorializing against the recent policy and religious declarations coming out of Israel concerning the identity of Jews that they sort of prioritize. Maxine Dover, our New York City bureau chief, has spent the past week and a half in Israel, and she met with some members of the Knesset political party leaders there. How many
hours a day is she getting power?
She's fine. She is a whirlwind of activity, and she's one of my favorite people. All charged. She walks around with extra battery packs and everything. Cool. Senator Schumer spoke on the floor yesterday on issues involving President Macron, French President Macron's recent statements against anti-Semitism and the BDS movement in Europe. So his remarks came from his office late yesterday afternoon, so we include those. And a host of other issues, including David Greenfield's surprise announcement.
Exit to the Met Council. Okay, this is our last 30 seconds. Please. Have any ideas or thoughts about Jay-Z's 444 album, particularly that section about the Jewish people and finances?
As a people, we tend to be underrepresented in finance, media, law, and entertainment. I'm kidding. So, look, I'm a huge fan. I think that they're royalty in the arts, and I'm not going to opine on that.
Okay. Asked and answered. Thanks so much for joining us. You have to come back.
Looking forward to it.
All right. The pipeline is open.
Thank you.
Make sure to check out the New York Jewish Life. It's available now, and a new edition coming in moments.
Tomorrow.
Tomorrow even. All right.